Okay, so we're back now. The cake is all covered. I've given it sharp edges. That's a class for you to try, ganashing for sharp edges. Now I'm going to make the cuff. This is how I do it. There are lots and lots of different ways of stenciling a cake. This is what works for me. I've tried quite a few. I have got the shortening on the cake, so it helps the stencil stick to the cake. I'm also going to put a little bit on the stencil itself. If you have stenciled before, you'll probably find that the Royal Icing wants to bleed under the stencil, and then you get a really messy result, especially not so much for something like this, but with a really fine pattern. It really just spoils the whole look, and sometimes you can't even see what the pattern of the stencil was. So if you put shortening on your stencil and attach it to your cake, it really makes it bind well with the cake, and you won't get that Royal Icing bleed underneath. It's a bit rid of that hand towel. Then we're going to make a cuff. If it's a square cake, you don't even need to do this part. Just the shortening alone will make the stencil stay in place for you. You don't have to stick pins in or anything like that. So then we're going to just sticky tape one part of our stencil on, and we're going to come along and we're going to place the stencil. As you can see, I've actually cut the side of my stencil down so it fits better. You can do that. You don't have to use them as they come. Okay, so we'll stick the other side and pull this part quite tight. You don't want it sort of being baggy around the cake. Okay, so we now have our collar in place for our stencil, and we're just going to really adhere the stencil with our fondant smoother onto the dummy, the cake. Okay, so that's stuck well. Now with your Royal Icing, it's really, really important to get the right consistency. If you get it too thin, when you pull the stencil away, it will pull with it and you'll have all these little bits sticking out, and you'll really lose your pattern. It doesn't keep that nice crisp edge, and when you look at the pattern, it'll be all sort of fuzzy and the Royal Icing goes really flat. Of course, if it's too thick, it'll basically just pull straight off the cake. So this is a good consistency where it's pretty much self-supporting. Okay, so it doesn't fall off the spoon. Now, I find this the easiest way to do it. You don't need very much, so I just apply it with my offset spatula to either end. Like that. And then I come along with this. Now you can use acetate, a thick piece of acetate like we use for our sharp edges, or this is actually just like from the hardware. It's a little scraper, I think, for plaster. You can even use an old credit card or something. And I'm just going to drag that Royal Icing along the stencil, pushing in. And you really don't want to leave very much behind. Okay, you can actually see through it. Now at this point you're probably thinking, well, that's not really going, you're not going to see that. You'll be quite surprised when we take the stencil off at just how much you can actually see and how strong that is. Okay, so once you've covered everything and you haven't got any missing gaps, you just go over quite firmly, because what we only want the Royal Icing as thick as the stencil, and we don't want any lumps and bumps or uneven patches. Okay, so now we're ready to remove the stencil. Okay, so to remove the stencil, we just undo the sticky tape that holds the collar in place, and then you just peel the stencil off like that. Okay, so as you can see, even though we used a really small amount of Royal Icing and it was really thin, the pattern is really, really strong. For these little bits up the top where the stencil was a little bit tall, we're just going to get a brush with a little bit of water and dab those down. So when you have finished one side, you let that dry for around half an hour. Sometimes it'll take a couple of hours if it's cold and humid. Then you just repeat the process on the other side, and your cake is just ready for whatever you're having on top. With your stencils, there's a huge range of stencils to play with. Don't be scared of them, they're really easy to use. If you're nervous about using Royal Icing to start with, a really easy way of using a stencil is just how we've done it, except with using a shimmer or a petal dust, like we did with the cupcakes on another video. Okay, so enjoy.